Hey guys, Jeremy here. So Chapter Approved 2018 has finally dropped, and weren't there a load of points reductions? I think no one was expecting quite the extent of points reductions that there were, and there were lots of other cool rules and formations and things that came out in the accompanying Vigilus command campaign book, sorry. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about, to think about, to predict about the meta, but I'll be doing a lot of those predictions in upcoming special videos in the next couple of weeks. But for this video, I wanted to focus on the Grey Knights points reductions because they're kind of public information and they can be looked at least in some way, just as a vacuum, kind of the Grey Knights Codex on its own. So I'm going to have a look at that now, and go through it in line with my previous video series that I've been doing. But before I touch on that, I do want to just mention what I think the meta might look like in a very broad way, in a very kind of general way, before just to inform some of the kind of discussion that will be happening about Grey Knights. So I personally think the biggest winners of the chapter approved are Tau. I think Tau gained the most relevant points reductions and the most kind of effective ones. And predominantly that you can see that through units like broadsides. So I think, for example, a lot of top tier Tau lists going into LVO will be featuring between 6 and 9 broadsides. And the amount of points that a Tau is gains just from taking 9 broadsides is kind of ridiculous. Because before, 9 broadsides was like a full 2,000 point army. But now it's just over 1,000 points. It's like 1,100 points. So we're going to see Tau lists totally blow out in terms of the amount of power they're going to have inside and just at their disposal. And as a result, we're going to see the meta warp around that. Because as you know, anyone that's played against Tau, even in previous editions, know how strong that shared Overwatch is, especially when they, with the Tau Sept, get to Overwatch on 5s. So we're going to see a meta shift back towards shooting. I know a lot of soup lists, both Chaos and Imperial soup lists at the top of the meta, have had a lot of combat power, combat punch. Even like the top Ynnari lists have been focused on using things like Shining Spears for combat. A lot of these lists are just going to fall down in the face of mass Overwatch. So it's going to be interesting how the meta evolves, but I think Tower at the top, and we're seeing other factions like Eldar got some interesting options for their Shining Spears, and we're also going to see Orcs, who gain some interesting things in the chapter approved, but are also a cutting edge codex with a lot of raw power. So I'm predicting for LVO, things like Tau and Orcs, a bit of Eldar, and a smattering of things like Imperial Guard as well that can go toe to toe with shooting with Tau. So meta's going to change. It's not going to be the same as it was. There's no way the meta will feature the same lists. Even though Chaos and Demons are still really strong, they're going to have to adapt to this new meta game. So let's look at Grey Knights in that light, okay? So how do they change? What's happened? Before I actually get started, I kind of want to give a thank you to Chris from Indomitable 40K for putting together this spreadsheet with the before and after points cost. So it lets us kind of actually see visually what's happened and not have to flip between the PDFs when we're analyzing it. So I'll put a link to this actually in my comments so people can find it. So, and it's certainly worth giving a shout out to Chris because it's a great resource. So I've blown up the Grey Knights section of his document here, and I'm going to go through as quickly as possible and within reason and stop when I hit kind of an important point. Grandmasters have gone down 30 points, as have many HQs across all the codexes. So it is good that Grandmasters have gone down, but they were never a real great option. They were an interesting option. They're still good, but with the amount of sweeping points costs across all the HQs and all the other HQs in the game, this is not particularly relevant, not meta-defining. However, Grandmaster Dread Knights going down at 20 points with an additional 6 points from their heavy Psy Cannon is relevant because they were already one of the best units in the Grey Knights Codex. So gaining points kind of out of nowhere while keeping the units that you would already want in your Codex, that's what you kind of want, but it also kind of represents you kind of shrug at it a little bit because why didn't the normal Dread Knights go down when they were already kind of scorned? No one was taking regular Dread Knights. It seems weird that the kind of superior version is the one that got the points reduction, but we'll take it. The next one is Brother Captain. Brother Captains are a very useful rule in the Grey Knights Codex in being able to double your smite range. It means you can be a little bit more conservative and still contribute free mortal wounds from the backfield. And it also, they synergize great with your banners. Banners that give you the mortal wounds banner that does D6 mortal wounds. That banner of Purifying Flame normally can't activate when it deep strikes. But if you have a Brother Captain, it extends the range to 12 inches, which lets you use it when you deep strike. So it's always nice to have that in your list, especially if you're planning on having an Ancient. So it's nice that they've gone down 40 points. a very welcome change, and this will also apply across to Brother Captain Stern as well. Libbies have gone down. We see a 44-point reduction, which is a big reduction for librarians. But unfortunately, I believe librarians needed more than this. Librarians needed access to a different psychic tree, like just the Librarius tree, or they needed full-strength smite. They needed something more than a points reduction to be able to compete with the other HQs. Obviously, not including some ridiculous points reduction that would make them an auto-include. For 113 points, I don't think they're worth it. I would rather include some of the named characters or even other utility characters like Brother Captains. Tech Marines are very interesting because there are a couple of reasons. Obviously, huge point reduction here. Not only did they go down 36 points, but we're seeing that for example, they have 2 servo arms, and those servo arms used to be 12 points. Now they're 0 points. So that is really important for Tech Marines. We also saw their plasma cutter go down. So they've had almost a points half, which turns them from what was a kind of a meme, kind of ridiculous unit into something that you can viably take to fill out a battalion and then combo it with your Grandmaster Dread Knights. So if your Dread Knight takes some wounds, your Tech Marine can repair it, and then the Dread Knight can gate in the psychic phase. So there's some really interesting little things you can do there to get value out of this Tech Marine by buffing your strongest units, such as these Dread Knight jams. Chaplains, similar to Libby's, it's good that they've gone down at quite a large chunk of points, but they just don't do enough. So there's no real reason why you would want to include a chaplain when you can include a Brother Captain or a named character. But obviously it's worth noting it is a big points cut. Brotherhood Champions, similar boat, although they do have a little bit more utility than some of these other characters because they can put out a lot of attacks and they have a lot of defensive capabilities when they need it with their special stances. So it is interesting they've gone down 23 points. I think it applies more to who's our named Brother Captain, Brotherhood Champion. What's his name? We got, Crow. So Castellan Crow gains a little bit as well because he goes down all the way to 80 points. But all in all, I just don't think that these Brotherhood Champions are that relevant. I think if it's a specific metagame like anti-demons meta where you just want lots of weight of attacks, you could take Crow. But the fact that his weapon doesn't have an AP value and only does 1 damage is a little bit silly. So I don't think that either regular Brotherhood Champions or Crow are that appealing. Going to the top of the named characters list, Draigo went down from 240 to 160. To 180. That's a 60-point difference for what was already one of our strongest characters. So if you didn't have Draigo already, there's probably pretty much no excuse to not have Draigo now in a predominantly Grey Knight army. Giving you that full Chapter Master buff, he's a beat stick in combat, he can heed the Prognosticast to go to a 12 invulnerable save. There's nothing not to love about Draigo, and he should be in any Grey Knights list now with this ridiculous points reduction. Then you go to Grandmaster Voldus. I kind of neglected to put emphasis on Voldus in my original Grey Knights Tactica, but Voldus is just a superior Libby. He's just better than a Librarian. You're going to take a Librarian, you'd always take Voldus, which is why I wasn't particularly keen on or that excited about the Libby point reduction. But Voldus for 153 points is certainly nothing to sneeze at. It's certainly something you can consider. I personally prefer Draigo, but you could include both. If you wanted a kind of an infantry-heavy list, I would be having Draigo and Voldus. And you know what? I'd throw Brother Captain Stern in there as well. Stern went down 52 points, down to 105 points. For 105 points, I think Stern is as close to an auto-include as you're going to get for a HQ. Similar to Draigo, he can cast 2 powers. He's good in combat. He doubles your psychic range. And he against demons, which is one of those situations where Grey Knights kind of don't want to verse demons because of how good that stratagem is for demons to recover lost units. But Stern kind of equalizes it because he can cast Smite across multiple units. So I think Stern's fantastic. And I think that a lot of these named characters and the Nemesis Dread Knight GMs are the biggest beneficiaries, which is interesting, or not so interesting, because they were already our best HQs. So with Grey Knights, the HQs that were already the best were the ones that got the most, I guess, welcome reductions. So it's a good thing, but as far as changing lists and introducing new innovations, I think the only one that to really mention, to really focus on is that Tech Marine. Let's move on now to some of the changes to the regular units. Terminators only went down 2 points and strikes were unchanged with their points costs. And that's disappointing Because if you're taking a predominantly Grey Knight army, you're going to be wanting to fill out 2 battalions, or at least a battalion and a vanguard detachment or something. And having to take multiple units of troops and them not be reduced in cost, except for only this kind of very, very token reduction for Terminators, unfortunately just isn't going to be enough to pull Grey Knights into the top of the meta. We're not going to even see them really gain that much, because where you need lots of troops, right? You need boots on the ground. So it's a shame to see, intercessors and veterans and other power armor style models take points, and regular Space Marine Terminators take really big points reductions. But our Terminators and our strikes get almost no love at all. So this is disappointing, and I know that this is probably unfortunately something that's going to dictate whether or not we were going to be able to be successful. And because there were no significant points cuts in the troops department, that's going to be something that's really going to inhibit and remain a challenge for Grey Knights. Moving into the elites, Apothecaries went down 15 points, not that significant. Brotherhood Ancients went down 38 points, and Paladin Ancients went down 42 points. This is similar to what I said about some of the HQs. These are already very appealing characters. Being able to have that, not only take that relic banner, but be able to give that aura of extra attacks is already an awesome tool to have for Grey Knights. They've just taken a really big points cut. So now they were already a really strong unit. Now they're an auto-include unit. So you're going to want either the Brotherhood or the Paladin Ancient. Paladins themselves, a 6-point reduction. That's something, right? Paladins were already statistically better than Terminators, outside of the fact that Terminators are troops. So for them to go down 6 points and Terminators only go down 2, just reinforces that people are going to, if they want a Terminator body, we're generally going to take Paladins. Something to think about for people that are writing lists that want to include those kind of elite units. 6-point reduction is over a 10-man unit is going to add up, and at 60 points is not something, once again, not something to sneeze at. Purifiers, big points cut. Unfortunately, Purifiers are just not a good unit in my opinion. Yeah, you get that D6 smite, but they're a power armor elite unit. They're going to cost a 19 plus 2 for the Storm Bolter, so the same cost as a Strike Marine. I just don't think they're good enough. I would rather a Strike Marine because I want the ability to deep strike. If I'm running these elite power armor units, I want to be able to manipulate the maneuverability. I want to focus on their elite shooting. I don't want to have them foot slogging across the battlefield unless I absolutely have to. And most importantly, they're not troops. If Purifiers had a way to become troops, for example, if you took Castellan Crow, then you could say, okay, you could justify them, right? You take 3 units, you put them in Rhinos, and they give you those CP from a battalion. But they're not troops. They only have 1 attack per model. They're just not good enough. So even that with that point shot, and it's really silly, right? That something goes down from 26 to 19, and in my opinion, there's still an inferior unit to a Strike Marine, which is pretty telling and pretty bit of a, I think, misjudgment from GW. This is kind of why it shows that sometimes point reductions just aren't enough. Sometimes you actually need to adjust rules and the way units operate. So I think the best way to address Purifiers would have been to make them troops if you had Crow, or just, I don't know, maybe give them more attacks. Maybe make them a unit that you want to ferry across the board and jam into combat. At the moment, they just don't have that utility because they only have the 1 base attack. Dreadnoughts and Venerable Dreadnoughts both went down, and then you can see there that the Ven Dreads actually went down more. And in my opinion, they were already a superior unit. So Venerable Dreadnoughts are actually, I think, now a competitive choice. In previous videos, I mentioned that I was more sold on like some of the gunships, some of the planes, whereas now I think that you're going to be wanting to take Ven Dreads for Astral Aim and just to occupy your backfield. So 25-point cut to Ven Dreads combined with a cut to both the missile launcher and the twin las cannon. So twin las cannons went from 50 to 40, so that's another 10 points, and the missile launcher went from 25 to 20, another 5 points, right? So that's a 40-point reduction for the Venerable Dreadnought with the 2 guns. That's pretty good. So that unit was already appearing in lists. It's going to now appear in more lists, and I think it is an auto-include unit, at least 1 to make use of Astral Aim, but as you'll see, I have to actually put 2 in one of my lists because I want to have a bit of redundancy. And I think that for the cost that they occupy now, they're actually quite competitive. Servitors, negligible change because some of the weapons they use went down. Doomblade Pen and Dreadnought, no change. And I'm not going to focus too much because I know Forge World is something that's optional, but the Doomglaive Pattern Dreadnought is already quite competitive, so it not going down is fine. Interceptors went down 2 points. This is interesting. Interceptors were an interesting choice, but unfortunately, I think that they are a little bit too fragile for their cost. I've done a bit of experimentation with interceptors, and yes, they were kind of 25 points with their Stormbolter before, which was kind of exorbitant. Going down to 21 plus the 2, so 23 points, it's a nice reduction, but I don't think it's enough to really bring them into the metagame. They're just too fragile, too expensive for what they do. You might have that big turn 1 when you unload a couple of them, move them into your opponent's base, do some shooting, maybe make 1 charge if you have 2 units, maybe get 1 charge off, but then they're just going to evaporate. If your opponent's got smites, they're just going to smite them all out. If your opponent's got any form of counter charge, they're just going to die to the counter charge. They just don't have the resilience, unfortunately. So once again, not enough, not significant enough to put these guys towards the top of the meta. Then we moved down to heavy support. Purgations had no change because those kind of that strike marine style body did not change. Nemesis Dreadknights needed some love, got no love. And Land Raiders, big cuts to Land Raiders, right? We're seeing, like, for example, Redeemer go all the way down to 180 points from 244. Unfortunately, I just don't think Land Raiders fit into the metagame enough. In a metagame where Imperial Knights are extremely competitive, extremely powerful, and people are thinking about Imperial Knights, people are like building lists thinking, okay, what happens if my opponent has a Raven Castellan with Call's Wrath? How do I deal with that? Okay, I'm taking these units, I'm doing this. Land Raiders just are so inferior to Imperial Knights and the equivalent, but they still are expensive. So even with these points cuts, it's still a bigger kind of investment to bring a Land Raider. And it just gets caught up in the area of effect of the decisions and the counterplay that people are employing against, I'm going to just say, Knight equivalents. So even though the cut to Land Raiders, if you're already running a Land Raider, you'd be super happy with these, right? It's super cool to have that points reduction, but it's just not enough to make them competitive because unfortunately they don't have the survivability that they really need. They need some sort of invulnerable save, some sort of ability to stand up to, volcano lances and like mass las cannons that you might find on like Baneblade chassis and things like that. Like we just don't see enough survivability, and as a result, I still don't think they're good enough with the points cuts. Okay, let's move across to some of the other vehicles. So Flyers had no cuts, and this is fair enough because they were already quite competitive. Like I do think Stormhawk Interceptors are still a good unit, and a couple of their guns went down, so they're okay. Storm Ravens, similar to what I've said in the last video and when I was discussing my EastCon list, they just get caught up too much in the metagame and they just get answered. So not going down is a relative nerf for them because why would you want to be taking units that were already shady and sketchy when you can move to something that actually got a points reduction like a Venerable Dreadnought? Same can be said for Storm Talons. Same can't be said for these dedicated transports because they are excellent. Really cheap wounds, right? Like 70 points for a Rhino, toughness 7, 10 wounds. So you're paying like 10 points for a toughness 7, 3-up save wound. When you think about like a Strike Marine is 21 points for a toughness 4, 3-up save wound, right? So it's double the cost for half the, like it's just not good, right? So dedicated transports, Razorbacks, Rhinos are excellent in an elite list because you're able to pull in those screening style units that are just as good as they are in the cheaper codexes like Sisters of Battle, things like that. We've already touched on the name characters. Dreadnought Teleporters going down to being free. I'm not even sure if that's actually, maybe that wasn't updated. And I'm not actually sure if they've gone down to being free. Maybe this stuff wasn't updated yet from the changes. But if it was free, if it is free, it just becomes an auto include. But I have a hunch that it's not free. But not much of a muchness, to be honest, because if you were going to take them with the teleporters, you'd be happy to pay the 10 points. If they are free, cool, you just auto take it. We're seeing some changes here with the Dreadnought close combat weapons going down a little bit. This has happened across all the Marines, which is cool if you're taking close combat weapons on your Dreadnoughts. It applies more to codexes like Blood Angels and Space Wolves that kind of want to be very aggressive with their Dreadnoughts, right? I think with Grey Knights, Even though, I mean, look, there is merit to gating in dreadnoughts with at least one dreadnought close combat weapon, but I think the double gun version with backfield for astral aim is more kind of appealing, I believe. But I can see merit to taking a kind of hybrid version where maybe you take a twin las cannon and the close combat weapon, and then maybe you have the flexibility to counter assault and to gate it in to try to make a kind of crucial charge late in the game. So it's nice that they've gone down 10 points. We haven't seen many of the other close combat weapons go down, except for obviously servo arms, which I touched on, which is going to have repercussions across the meta because there are a lot of units that use servo arms. So not just our tech marines, but we're going to see other things like Mechanicus HQs and other units that kind of have to take servo arms, but are kind of mandatory for a list. So AdMech's a big one, but even things like some of the kind of chaos ones that use it. And we're going to also see maybe NGCs potentially see play in some contexts. Okay, so now we're going to go up to some of the guns that have received cuts. Assault cannons didn't go down, makes sense because they put them up in the last chapter approved. Some of the combi weapons have gone down, and some of the costs are quite relevant. So combi weapons are something now that you can consider. Grey Knights never really made great use of combi, but it's just something to note for codexes that do. Heavy flamers have gone down, but once again, flamers are one of those units that when they're good, they're already good, even if they cost 17 points. The reason why flamers don't see play is just because of the way the deep strike rules work. You can only deep strike to be 9 or more inches away. Flamers have an 8-inch range. So flamers needed more than this. Flamers needed a range increase or a way to increase the range. That's what they needed, especially for Grey Knights, because Grey Knights want to be deep striking. They want to be, moving in aggressively, not foot slogging across the board with their flamers. It's just not going to work. So even though flamer decreases are good for other codexes, in some respects, I think generally speaking, the problems with flamers are the range. They could have gone to 10-inch range or something like that. Or even if they weren't, give some codexes the ability to do that, like maybe allow drop pods or other ways to deliver flamers. Incinerators at the least, which are not regular flamers, should have gone up in their range. I really strongly believe that incinerators need a 10-inch range because they are supposedly a stronger flamer. Maybe it's possible that they could be able to kind of shoot those flame bursts a bit further. We're seeing some other elite weapons go down with the heavy plasma cannons, heavy psi cannons. That, as we can see, the heavy psi cannon is a specific reduction to Dreadknights and the Nemesis Dreadnought GM. The Icarus Storm Cannon, that I believe is on the Stormwalk Interceptor, so that's how that gets a decrease. Incinerators and Terminator incinerators have gone down. I do want to mention that I think it is important that some of these Terminator weapons are the ones that have gone down. So I think you can see here that it's actually across, we'll scroll across. Missile launchers have had a cost reduction across all codexes, as have things like plasma cannons, multi-melters. These are all interesting and will be relevant in some contexts, but they're not super relevant in the context of Grey Knights, notwithstanding, of course, this change for missile launchers for the Venerable Dreads. Silencer Terminators, 2-point reduction, but Silencer Psi Cannon Terminators have gone down from 20 points to 11 points. That I think is enough to now be considered, like almost specifically on the Paladins, because if you're taking a big unit of Paladins now, maybe it's nice to have those 4 Psi Cannons in that unit, so that you're going to be dishing out 16 Strength 7, AP 1, 2 damage shots. When you start going up to that kind of threshold of that many shots, even though the Psi Cannons aren't an amazing weapon, it starts to add up. 4 Psi Cannons are kind of good. So it is relevant that they've gone down from 20 to 11, and I do expect people that are taking Paladins to now consider taking Psi Cannons instead of Silencers, which previously were the better weapon. No points cost regarding some of these very common weapons, like obviously Stormbolters didn't go down. Then we're seeing the Twin Las Cannon follow suit with the normal Las Cannon, same with the other twin weapons. So that pretty much rounds out the Grey Knight points reductions, I believe. So that's it, guys. So let's just a little quick summary. Unfortunately, I think all the best units got a bit better and a lot of the fringe units didn't change. which is a great shame for Grey Knight fans in terms of like having a broad collection, wanting to use new units, wanting to try new things. But if you're just wanting to be competitive, you are going to receive a kind of a points that you didn't have before that you can now siphon into more units. So let's have a look at what I've done with a couple of lists. So where are we? We're here. So these is my list one. You can see here that I've taken a battalion with Draigo and Stern. It's worth noting with these lists, I've decided to go with mono Grey Knights because at this point, I think there's no real point discussing Grey Knight soup because we know that a couple of Nemesis Dread Knight GMs in an Imperial Guard Brigade list are going to be good, right? We already know that. There's no point writing lists like that because we're just demonstrating, I guess, the weaknesses of Grey Knights more than the strengths. By doing mono, I get to kind of show and demonstrate what we can do just with Grey Knights. So Draigo, I think, is an auto include. Stern, I think, is as close as being to an auto include as reasonably possible. So there you go. 2 awesome HQs in a battalion with units of Strike Marines. Strike Marines just giving you CP, they're giving you flexibility. I've just gone all with Falchions. I haven't even given them a single special weapon like a, what do you call it? Silencer, because I want to retain that combat ability. I want to retain all my Falchions so that's what makes, I guess, Grey Knights strong and why I've had a bit of success with them lately in tournaments, just because of their kind of can do everything. They can shoot well and they can combat well and they can even do things in the psychic phase and they can deny and things like that. Just fighting over all phases of the game is very important with Grey Knights. So you need to maximize that. So 3 units of strikes, keep them cheap, as cheap as possible. Then I've gone with another unit that I mentioned received very relevant points cuts, which is the Ancients. And the Paladin Ancient received the most points cut. It's only 100 points now if you include the cost of the Stormbolter. So he is awesome for what he does. And he's actually the Warlord in this list and will take first to the fray. So that's the same with pretty much all Grey Knight lists, unless you're in a soup detachment with a different Warlord trait, like you might have like, I don't know, like an Imperial Guard Warlord. If you are playing mono Grey Knights, you always want first to the fray. And that's just because of how many, once you're rolling like 5 or 6 reroll charges off this one guy, it starts to hit a critical mass of value. Whereas if you're just running like 2 Grey Knights combat units, maybe it's not that good. Maybe you could just use a CP reroll. But if you're rolling 6 or 7 charges, then you want this Ancient. And in this list, he's really good. He also has the Relic Banner, so when he comes down from Deep Strike, he'll get that D6 Smite. Then I've got 2 Venerable Dreadnoughts with Twin Ladders and Missile Launcher, only 145 points for them. Pretty significant reduction, and you give them both Astral Aim. I don't think there's any real point to mess around. The idea is that if one of them dies, the other one can then pick up the slack, move into cover, and start using Astral Aim. So there is the flexibility there, the redundancy. Some people might say, well, what's the point of having one in cover with Astral Aim if you've got another one out of cover with no Astral Aim? Well, the argument is that on a large battlefield, maybe you can put one of your las cannons within line of sight of just like one flank. So your opponent can only shoot a very select amount of things at that one dreadnought, while the other dreadnought might be somewhere else that's more exposed. Therefore, he is in the first floor of a ruin. So you can utilize terrain such that you can maximize it. So even though you've got only one Astral Aim, you'll always be getting value out of it, and you'll be protecting both. One from being in cover, the other one from just using line of sight blocking. Then in this list, I've got a couple of Razorbacks, one with the Twin Las, one with a Twin Heavy Bolter. The reason why they're not homogenous is just because I had awkward points, but I think both options are good, especially now that Twin Las has went down 10 points. So 110 points, it's okay. In a list that Grey Knights typically don't have a lot of heavy weapons, I think it's okay to pay a premium for some of these units because it just gives you those weapons that you might need to pick up kill points, pop rhinos, pop other things so that your Stormbolters can then accrue value later on in the shooting phase. Then it's also worth noting that some of these strikes are going to deploy on the board. You'll notice I've got more Strike Marines. So because of just the way the Deep Strike's going to work, some of them will deploy on the board. It's also important that you have at least one source of gate that's not a Dread Knight GM, so that someone can cast gate on the Dread Knight GM on turn 1. So that will be one of these units of strikes. Then I've got 2 Dread Knight GMs, Sword Silencer and Psy Cannon. Just the way I run them, I just think that's the best option. Some people think that because the flamers, the heavy silencers, heavy, what are they called? incinerators went down, maybe it's worth taking them. I don't think so because they only have the 8-inch range, right? They're just not good. They can't shoot after they deep strike, so why would you take them, right? You're better off with the silencer. So, I mean, in the case that, I mean, you know what? I'm actually going to check because I've got a feeling that maybe, what am I doing here? Yeah, that's it. I'm just going to check to see the range of the heavy silencer because I don't want to get caught. It is actually 12 inches. So you can deep strike with a heavy incinerator and use it. So look, that is an option to use the incinerator. So I'm mistaken there, my bad. So there is merit now with the Dreadnought GMs to swap over from the silencer to the incinerator. I initially, when I was writing the list, thought it was the 8 inches, but it is 12 inches. So you can deep strike and shoot it, and it works in Overwatch. So maybe instead of the silencer, you swap over to the incinerator. That's certainly something to think about, which has gone down now. The heavy incinerator. Where are we? So it's gone down to down to 19 points. So it's actually a point cheaper than the Gatling silencer. So with that in mind, I'm going to change my recommendation that you actually run the GMs with the heavy incinerators. Okay, so I'll just write it there. But that's something to think about. Okay, so heavy incinerator. All right, so cool, we're done there. And to round out this battalion, I've got another 3 units of Strike Marines. So in this list, there are 6 units of strikes. Some of them are going to be on the board, maybe 1 or 2 units on the board, most of them in reserves. The idea is to overwhelm with tactically positioned Strike Marines while you use the power of the GMs and your characters like Draigo, Stern, the Paladins, and then you've got the backfield with the Dreadnoughts, and maybe you've got like also a Razorback or 2 in the backfield, occupying the space, stopping people from deep striking in the backfield while your Strike Marines and the forceful GMs push forward into their deployment zone. So I actually think this list is pretty good. And I'm looking forward to experimenting with something like this and playing with it. It's cool that you get the double battalion amount of command points, because when you're running so many GMs, you're going to be wanting to use Heed the Prognosticars. So it's relevant that you've got enough CP to fuel it. Now, here's an alternative take. I know I've been waffling on for a while, so I'm going to be a little bit quicker with this list. This list is just a version that's gone more down the Paladin route. So here I've got a battalion with Draigo and Stern again. I think their auto includes 3 units of strikes with Falchions. I got my Razorbacks, and my second detachment is now a Vanguard detachment with my Nemesis Dreadnought GM. Let's swap that silencer for an incinerator. And I've got 2 units of Paladins in the list. So I've got a unit of 10 Paladins, 4 with side cannons, 7 with halberds, 3 with hammers, and then 5 Paladins, 2 with side cannons, 4 with halberds, 1 with hammer. So 15 Paladins over those units. And as I mentioned in my analysis of the actual weapons, I went with the side cannons because I feel like you hit a critical mass of 2 damage weapons that can really help against certain types of units. And it's cool that when you have those Paladins with the 3 attacks base, Falchions no longer become your optimal weapon. You obviously now want one of the alternative weapons. Halberds are really good because they push you up that strength threshold, so that with Hammerhand, for example, Paladins will actually be wounding Imperial Knights on 4s. Normally it's 5 with +1 strength, then they go to 4s with Hammerhand. So Paladins charging like a Castellan will just like kill it pretty much. So that unit's actually really strong. Being able to gate this unit around and potentially give it Sanctuary for a 4-up invul, and it's a scary unit. Your opponent really has to focus on killing it. And if you're able to do some shenanigans with pile-ins and maybe pin a unit in combat so it can't get shot, like if those Paladins kind of declare an assault against a couple of units, kill one unit and pile into another one and pin one of the models so it can't fall back, and you keep those Paladins locked up for a turn so they can't get shot, that's a game you're probably going to win straight off the bat. So Paladins are a really strong unit, and I think given they've got the points reduction, it's now something to look at. Now we have to look at them and say, okay, maybe we try to make something work here. We got some points reductions with the Paladins. We got some points reductions with the characters. Now we can actually fit a list that works with Paladins. Before, you just, because Draigo and Stern and all these other things are more expensive, you wouldn't have the backfield. You'd have the Paladins, but you wouldn't have the support. Now we've got the characters, we've got some Paladins, and we have some backfield, right? We got some strikes in the army, we've got Razorbacks. We actually have the ability to play over the battlefield with the units. So I like this list. It still comes in with 9 command points, which is going to be enough to maybe do 1 or 2 turns of He the Prognosticars on the Dreadnought GM. If it gets picked off early, you can then use that stratagem with Draigo and keep him, a real strong force that your opponent's going to have to consider. So guys, that rounds out my lists for today. I do want to mention at the end that I am sorry that I have made that mistake with the Heavy Incinerator. That is something that represents an even greater buff for Nemesis Dreadnought GMs. So our best unit, in my opinion, had the biggest improvement. It had a significant points or relatively significant points reduction, and now you're going to see it use this flamer, which has utility on Overwatch that the silencer just didn't have. So really cool stuff happening there. I'm really excited actually to start using these models with the incinerators. So we did get some changes, maybe not the changes we wanted, but stay tuned for my future videos. We're going to look at the meta in a more kind of elaborate, holistic way. Guys, thanks for watching and see you next time.